We're not sick.
We are not sick!
It was incredibly intimidating, but also very exciting.
Welcome to The Chat With Us, a The Last of Us after show powered by Fandom. Coming up, we'll hear from the stars of The Last of Us, a GameSpot expert on the differences between the show and the game, and much more.
To go from just the dead of night to outright insanity.
I'm Senior Editor at TV Guide Megan Vick. I'm in studio with Metacritic Senior Editor Danielle Turchiano. And of course, we have my co-host, GameSpot Entertainment Editor Chris Hayner, who is Skyping in from Florida.
Hello.
I made it.
The show is a post-apocalyptic situation. The show actually moves the video game back 10 years. So we're starting in 2003, and we're getting an introduction to normal life before we find out that fungi have taken over people's brains and have turned them into soulless killing monsters. And then we do get a flash forward within that first episode to 20 years later of when society has shut down. Everybody's basically in like military zones in order to try and keep the infection out. But yeah, let's start with like that beginning set of like being introduced to Joel, his daughter Sarah, who's played by Nico Parker, and sort of like finding out what their family dynamic is like.
Gonna have to wear diapers soon.
He says I don't already.
I went into this show solely looking at it from the show standpoint, not necessarily comparing it, not necessarily comparing the characters. And one of the things that I really loved is that I felt like I didn't need to know their dynamic from the game. Meeting them in the show, you get right away how important the father-daughter bond is, with it being his birthday and she is out to, fix his watch as a present. And it's a small thing, but it becomes such an important thing for the series. And for this first episode, especially as, the outbreak gets worse and she starts to worry, hey, she was in the city for a hot minute. Does that mean she's infected? And so just the layers that they put on the characters and the layers that they put on the relationship, I thought was a really great start to this show.
I really like how the outbreak sort of starts intimate, right? Like you get these little hints. There's a radio newscast of like something's going down in Indonesia and we don't understand why you should care about that. But like your intro to these zombies is like their next door neighbors get infected and Sarah is the first one to see it, and you have no idea what's going on until Joel and Tommy show up and pick her up, and then you realize that this is at least in their immediate area in the city, if not global. It escalates very quickly into what it is, but I like that it started small and you're understanding how this is affecting them directly immediately before you're understanding what impact it's had on the rest of the world.
Well, I think, we'll be talking to a Last of Us game expert from GameSpot later on in this very video. But what I will say is I love the games. I'm a huge fan, and I went in kind of wary. I love everyone involved, but we've seen video game adaptations before, Halo, and they're not great. They're not great. But this hews so close to the game. Obviously, there will be pieces throughout the season and then hopefully throughout further seasons that sort of take alternative routes from the games. But this first episode is such an excellent, for me, encapsulation of the prologue of The Last of Us. Like, the game also does a very good job at showing the importance of the relationship between Joel and his daughter Sarah, and so like when you get to that moment, it hurts. Like it stabs you hard because it sucks. And I think another thing this show does, which I really enjoyed, is it switches to the calamity of apocalypse so quickly. Like it's quiet, and then there's helicopters and trucks and things crashing and gunshots, and like I love when that is portrayed in such a way that you just see this extreme clash of sound to go from just the dead of night to outright insanity.
I don't have a PlayStation. I did not play the game. But I, as a person that works in pop culture, like I was obviously like aware of the game. And one of the things that people say is that it is a very cinematic game. And I think like that translation, it felt like a video game that was made to be adapted. We've talked to the people behind the scenes, and they said that like if they were going to make any changes, it needed to better the story of the game. And I think that so far from what we've seen is like that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking to the cinematic aspect of it, I mean, Chris, you were talking about like the sound going from quiet to the calamity, but I think also like this is a little bit later in the episode, but as the family is fleeing, putting the camera in Sarah's perspective in the car and seeing the chaos and like making the viewer feel like it's almost the first person game. Like you are part of this, you know, you need to feel how serious this is. I think that was a really smart choice.
It's so chaotic as you see cars crashing and people freaking out and fires breaking out. And you're like, this was a normal city.
Yeah.
What,
and the
3 hours ago? Yeah. Oh my God.
For me, I mean, I'm always, that's a big trigger point for me is when planes fly too low, and like to see first the jets flying over the city in the episode, to know something is going on elsewhere that they're trying to contain, and then to see that plane crash. That to me is like the biggest indicator of, you know, this is global, guys. Like this is not going to be, you can flee the city and you'll find safety 1, 2, 3 towns over.
And then, of course, it all leads to kind of the kicking off point of what this show is going to be. Sarah, who we've taken the first half hour of this show to grow to love, dies. That is another moment pulled right out of the games. And it's not what you expect from like what is essentially a horror television show.
And I think that the important part is, and I think something that's going to be very important going forward, is that like she is not killed by zombies. She is killed by American military, and it didn't need to happen. They did it because they were trying to control the spread, and so they are killing it. And I think that's going to be very important for Joel going forward, of how he interacts with law enforcement, etc.
One of the things that I always look for in a genre show is, you know, I don't believe in things like ghosts and monsters in the real world. Very valid if you do believe in it. I just don't. So I'm always looking for what I consider the real danger, which is the human danger. And what I always gravitate to are the shows that the human danger is maybe just as great as whatever is happening. And I think this was a perfect way of saying it is, you know, I mean, it's the way they're handling it, and it's the way that the world will then be set up going forward.
As great as our opinions on that scene are, I think the people that our audience want to hear from are Pedro Pascal and Nico Parker and Gabriel Luna about filming that scene and what it was like to adapt it straight from the video game.
It was an incredible opportunity for me to get started in that way. That was an instant father-daughter bond, and this little family, essentially, that is instantly torn apart by Outbreak Day. An iconic moment that exists in the game that fans are all very aware of, that basically shapes who this man is for the rest of his journey. So it was incredibly intimidating, but also very exciting.
Somebody who's played the games, and somebody's, and I sat there and I went behind the monitor. I'm like, wow, we're even kind of framing it in the same way. He's cradling her in the same way. Also, just to play that moment, to have to live through it, to see my brother in pain, losing the one thing that matters the most to him. She matters a great deal to me. Like I said, we're a very small family unit. It was rough, man. That was a rough night. And there's a lot of expectation on that scene. But what I could see on the monitor and the way we were handling it, we were being really, really true to the game.
We rehearsed it once just for kind of physicality, as in like, you'll be here, I'll be here, this is this, without any speaking or lines. And then I remember Craig kind of came over to us as just kind of like a last prompt. He like turned to me and he goes, "This is the most pain that you've ever been in your entire life. This is the most excruciatingly painful thing that's ever happened to you." And then he said the same thing to Pedro. And, you know, like, for me, there's more of a physical aspect of it, but for Pedro, there's more of a emotional pain. But I think the fact that it was like the same kind of sentence could be completely applicable to both of us. I think we both would kind of just like, oh, okay. And then I think also just the way that we wanted to portray it is just how much they care for one another. I think the bond between them is so strong and so important, and you see Joel kind of carry it throughout his story and his character arc, and I think it was something that we all kind of wanted to treat respectfully, and also to execute it in a way that, because, you know, the game does it so quickly and so beautifully, and we had more time and more space, and I think we all just kind of wanted to achieve that same level of importance that Sarah has to Joel.
You did a freaking amazing job.
Well, you do an amazing job to the whole thing.
You take your compliment.
You take yours.
After that scene, we get an immediate flash forward. We are now 20 years in the future. It is 2023. Everybody is sort of in these like military camps that it's kind of like a totalitarian regime. Our first intro into it is we see a little kid who walks up into this safe zone. He is immediately tested and killed because they cannot risk having this fungus infect their safe camp. But it's not great.
I mean,
20 years in the future.
Oh, that. I was going to say, like, I'll be honest, when I first watched the episode, I was a little bummed that the introduction into Boston was this unnamed, unknown kid. I was hoping we were going to meet Ellie at that moment. But then I was so excited by what they did. Excited is going to make me sound like a jerk, but
Danielle, no.
I know, here we go. But I was so excited with what they did with it because it speaks to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, where it's just like, this is what the world has become, you know, where at least they did ask questions first. They tested him. They didn't shoot him on sight. They tested him. It came out red.
We don't have to wait that long to get to Ellie, though. She is present, and she does not disappoint. I think one thing we know, Bella Ramsey was a scene stealer on Game of Thrones.
I didn't know what to expect from the actual first meeting of Ellie. And what I really liked about it is that right away the character is like, I'm a kid, but I'm not bowing to authority. I'm not afraid of authority. Like, I'm in this terrible situation being chained and held captive and still holding her ground and very strong. And that to me, like, obviously we know she needs to survive this. We know that, sorry, spoiler alert, she will survive this given the game. But I think like it takes a lot sometimes to prove that the character is worthy of that kind of survival. And I think like they did that really quickly with her.
I also think one of the really interesting things about Ellie and her relationship with literally every adult in the franchise is she was born in this world. She doesn't know what the world was like before like everyone got a bunch of fungus in their heads and looked weird. They put just the right amount of like, hey, screw you, man, into also just sadness that like they don't really have a life outside of their captivity, but also awe at the things that those around them are doing because that's so out of left field for them.
Joel and Tess come across Ellie, and due to the fact that they have lost a car battery, they are tasked with taking her outside the city in order for them getting her to a safe house for the Fireflies who are hoping to use her for a cure. They have to escort her outside the wall. And I think that the scene in which Ellie is talking about like, I've never been outside the wall. There is that like weird mixture of like Ellie's excited to go outside the wall, but also all these questions, but like, how is it safe? How are you going to protect me? And like sort of that childlike innocence. I thought that was balanced really well of like, this is a kid that's been captured their whole life, but like at the same time, like they've been in captivity for a reason and a very valid reason at that.
I will say though, the beauty of Ellie is that she always seemingly has a quip for the exact right moment, specifically when Marlene and Joel are sort of making the deal for what's going to happen.
If not, we kill her. Deal.
Really? That fast?
I love the mix of excitement and aloofness that comes with that age.
So we end this first episode with Joel, Tess, and Ellie heading outside of the Boston area. We find out earlier in the episode that there is a radio code.
What's 80s?
And as they are leaving, the camera goes back to their apartment and we hear an 80s song playing over the radio. So we know that trouble is going. And then we get this very ominous shot of a completely dilapidated Boston, which I went to college in Boston. So I was like trying to pick up like which buildings they were. And it's.
Did you find your local Starbucks?
I did not find the local Starbucks, but I was like, oh, that's the, like I picked out like certain, I'm pretty sure that's the Prudential Center. That's like Axis like that. As we've established, Danielle and I are not video game players. We apologize to everyone. And while Chris has extensive experience with the game, we also wanted to talk to our friends at GameSpot about this episode and how it compares to them. So check out this little segment of us talking to Team GameSpot.
This is video producer Jake Decker. He loves the games. He's seen the show. And so we're going to dig into it. First of all, Jake, what'd you think of the episode?
Overall, I really enjoyed it. I think coming off of the game, it was a bit weird because what I noticed what the show does is it'll take key scenes from the opening of the Last of Us game, and those will be interspersed throughout the show, but it'll be acted by different people, right? Like it's kind of weird hearing Pedro Pascal say things that I am so used to hearing Troy Baker say in the games. But then beyond that, I think all of the background that the show adds is really good. And it adds a lot to the universe that I didn't think needed to be there, but I stand corrected after watching that first episode.
I don't know about you, but like for me, there were certain moments where it felt like they were even like down to the angle of the camera pulling from the games.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that scene where Sarah gets in the car and you have that shot from her perspective in the back and it kind of moves. That is exactly what happens in the game.
Mm-hmm.
You play as Sarah, you get in the back of the car, and then you have control over what you want to see. And even some of the lines that Joel says were also in the game. Like they talk about that family whose house burned down, or they want to stop and help those people. All that stuff is right from the game. And for me, it was a little off-putting, right? Hearing that again, but I think the actors that they found, Pedro Pascal, are all really good, and they are able to kind of put their own spin on these lines and these scenes. It still feels very respectful of the source material.
Anyone who's played the game knows the death of Sarah, like it essentially creates who the Joel we know is.
Yes.
Like this is sort of the formational moment for him. How do you think that scene in particular held up against the games? Do you think it had as much of an impact for those who maybe haven't gone through The Last of Us before?
Considering how closely that scene actually sticks to the game, I imagine people who haven't played the game and are experiencing The Last of Us for the first time, that would still probably wreck them, because it is a very emotional scene. It deals with a profound loss, and the build up to it, both in the game and in the show are very good. And I think that's one thing that the show adds to it, is it adds more backstory to who Sarah is, what she was doing beforehand, how she was living, like her relationship with Joel and even Tommy, right? As he shows up early on. So I have to imagine that it would even hit harder.
Do you have any final thoughts? Like anything else you want to say about the episode?
I thought it was really cool that Marlene is played by the same person who plays Marlene in the game. I thought that was really cool, and she nailed it. Like she nailed it in the game, she nailed it in the show, fit perfectly in both. Like I thought that was cool, and I kind of hope to see more of that in the future. I know they've said that Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson are supposed to be in the show at some point as cameos. I'm not entirely sure how big their role will be, but I'm curious to see, because Marlene was great.
Awesome. I'll be completely honest with you. We're definitely going to check in with you later in the season, because I want to know what you think, especially as we get deeper and deeper into this horrible clicker world.
I've wanted to talk about something for a little bit here. You hate horror more than almost anything on this planet. In fact, I would argue more than anything on this planet. I've watched you squirm and be freaked out by the slightest things, and you won't allow me to send you gifts from The Ring.
That is actual trauma. I refuse to be bullied, and I consider anybody sending me gifts of that demon child crawling through a television is bullying, and I will sue.
So when you told me that you watched and enjoyed this show, I was genuinely blown away. I didn't understand it. However, you're still terrified of it.
Absolutely. And I think it's a testament to the show of how good it is that I continue to watch after the nightmare fuel that is within this series, which brings us to a fun segment that we're Megan's nightmare scene of the week.
Ooh.
And in our first episode, there was a very clear winner. There was nothing else. When Sarah goes into the Adler's house, and we see Grandma leaning over Mrs. Adler with the fungi coming out of her mouth. I had to pause, get up, and walk away. Turn on a few more lights in my house. And I was like, this is unacceptable. Why is it coming out of it's so the way that the fungi comes out of the mouth is like at first you just thought like, oh, Grandma had some hair in her mouth, and then you realize no, that is absolutely. And then she like comes after Sarah. And I will also say I rewatched the episode to prepare for this, and it scared me even more the second time, because I did not realize that earlier in the episode when Sarah's over there baking cookies, if you look in the background, you see changing. Grandma getting infected.
I love that part.
That's what I thought your nightmare scene was going to be, because that freaked me out. Seeing her in the background with her, it just looked like her jaw was coming unhinged.
And she's blurry, so you can't quite know what's going on.
So the thing that freaks me out the most is like supernatural horror movies with like the weird like disjointed thing, and that's what she's doing when her face is like, And I'm like, no, thank you. No, thank you. And like that combined with knowing what comes later. But yeah, it is specifically when she looks up and the fungi is coming out of her mouth. I was like, I can't do this. And I know it's not the last time it's going to happen.
You
but
are
like,
in for a very long season of television.
I mean, even just in this episode, I mean, obviously that was, the first major look at what this is. But when Joel and Tess later on find the person like as part of the wall, I thought that might be your nightmare scene, because I thought it was very pretty. I thought it was like artistic, but at the same time, when you think about what it means, the whole body taken over and like now a part of the environment, I don't know, that is a nightmare to me. Yeah, that's a nightmare to me. I'm sorry, I don't like nature.
I think I'm
right too, given this show.
The scariest thing for you about the show is nature.
It's fungus is natural, and therefore I am.
That's
and
true.
also the beginning of this episode, the very beginning, when they were in the 1968 talk show, and they're talking about how this could happen. They talk about warmer temperatures, so it's not just fungus; it's also climate change, and we are in the middle of that right now. So I think I'm correct when I say that I'm afraid of nature.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest.
Noted vegetable hater, Danielle Turchiano.
That hasn't come up yet. How does that come up? Sure. Yeah.
Oh, it's
true.
noted. It's noted
true.
to me.
It is true.
But I will say we're roughly 5 years from our own Last of Us scenario. Let's be honest here.
One other thing that we should point out is that Metacritic does have the Metascore for The Last of Us video game. It's been up for years, but also now The Last of Us television show. So if you want to know what critics have to say, you should head over to the Metacritic page for The Last of Us. Take a look at what people are saying. You can also leave your own reviews and comments if you disagree with our critics. That's always the fun part of this, is the debate and the discussion. And I think
if you want to know what this critic thinks,
yes,
5 stars. 5 stars. But like, man, based on what I've seen, this is a really good show.
One person I don't think we talked about enough, because we can't talk about her enough, is Ellie.
Yes.
And I believe it's time, Chris, I believe you have a very special Ellie segment that you want to introduce.
I sure do. Ellie, my foul-mouthed queen. If you've played the games, Ellie curses a bunch. Guess what? She curses a bunch in the show too. So we've just decided we're going to do Ellie's curse of the week. We're going to pick out her best foul-mouthed moment of the week. And just dang it if it's not wildly entertaining watching someone who is playing a literal child. And that child has the foulest mouth. So this week it was legitimately the introduction scene from Ellie. She's asked to count slowly to 10 to prove that she's not a zombie, and she says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
You.
Kids cursing is always entertaining to me. Honestly, in a show that is so dark and sad and scary and full of death and destruction in Boston, it's really good to see something that makes me smile and laugh.
Considering the note that the episode left off on, I want to end this show on a note that makes us happy, and I think Ellie's cursing tribute is the best way to do that. The Chat With Us will be back every week, breaking down every episode of The Last of Us. So please come back and join us. We'll have more special guests hanging out, and we want to have more fun with you guys.
Leave some comments. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think of the show, what you think of this show, I guess, and like what you want us to talk about.